Today, we are going to begin a presentation and a look into a segment of genealogy that nobody can do without. In episode 1, I provided you just a glimpse, a very brief introduction that if you were interested in doing your genealogy, what can you find at home and what can you find out from your relatives? In episode 2, I gave you a look into 4 particular websites that would definitely help you with your genealogy. And now, in episode 3, I want to present to you a glimpse into the Federal Census. We have just participated in the census of 2020. The Federal Census is taken every 10 years. This collection of records is going to be one of the most important records in your research. And you know, it doesn't matter what nationality our ancestors were, because as they came to America, they're coming into the melting pot. They're coming to be Americans. And so each and every one of us in our research, as we trace our ancestors back, we will be needing the information that we garner from the Federal Census. So what I'd like you to do is, as we talk about the Federal Census, think of it as like a time capsule. This is a glimpse, a mere glimpse of that particular decade, that particular year that the census was enumerated. This is giving us some insight into what our ancestors were experiencing at that particular time period. Now, these records that we are going to research, that you are going to research, these records are not infallible. The information, this isn't carved in stone anywhere. What you have to remember throughout any census record that you research is our ancestors are providing the information to the census taker. The census taker is simply recording what he is told or what she is told. If our ancestors happen to give false information, well, the census taker really wasn't interested in searching for the truth. They were there to record. It just so happens my grandmother on my mother's side, in the 1900, 1910, 1920 census, her date of immigration is recorded as 3 different years. Come to find out, when I did find her immigration to the United States, none of the years matched. So let's take a look at the census records and see what they have to offer, but also there might be a little bit more research that you have to do before we take the information and put it into your family history. We begin. Well, what is the census? The census is simply a counting of all the people in the United States. And the census was created in the Constitutional Convention of 1787, Article 1, Section 2. And in that, here it says, the actual enumeration shall be made within 3 years after the first meeting of Congress of the United States, and within every subsequent term of 10 years. So there we have the foundation of the census, created in 1787, as I just said. It's part of the Constitution. It is simply a counting of the population. What for? It's to determine two things: representation of the population in Congress, and to determine federal monies being given to the states. So the federal government is utilizing the count for very specific reasons. Now, sorry to dash your bubble, but the Founding Fathers, well, I don't really think they had genealogy and genealogy research in their mind when they created this. But because we as researchers utilize what we have available to us, that we are very thankful to the Founding Fathers for creating this set of records that we, in fact, can utilize for our own family research. Census takers. We're normal, everyday people, just like you and me, from all walks of life. As you go through the census records, I really need you to keep these things in mind. Just because one knows how to write does not guarantee they know how to spell correctly. Be very vigilant and be very aware of misspellings, misspellings of last names, misspellings of given names, misspellings of places. Ever since I've been doing my genealogy, I've taken a record of how many times my last name has been misspelled. I have it where there are 65 different spellings on the census records of my last name. Now, whether any of you can beat that number, well, maybe once we open, we can talk about that when you come into the library. Census takers wrote what they heard. It wasn't a matter of our ancestors spelling it correctly. They simply wrote what they heard, took the information, and went on to the next household. Census takers wrote down what our ancestors told them, whether it was true or false. Now, I'm sure there wasn't anything notorious or anything criminal behind giving the census takers false information. But if you see discrepancies through census records, that just gives you something else to research. And finally, good penmanship was not a requirement. If you happen to come across a census record that is written in the finest penmanship possible, count your blessings. You will be running across census records that are somewhat illegible, that are, well, let's put it like when you go and get a prescription from your doctor and the scribble, that could very well be waiting for you on one of the census records. There are times where the people microfilming the record didn't expose it correctly, and the images are so faint, you might have trouble reading the information there as well. We give credit to census takers. A lot of times, the more recent, they are simply walking from house to house to house. Previous censuses, early 20th century, late 19th century, they are on bikes, on horses, because they have to go count each and every person of the United States. So a lot of credit does in fact go out to these census takers. And as you can notice, many of them have the big ledger books available to them, and they're writing down all of the information. So not only do they have to go from point A to point B, but they have to lug these particular books throughout their journey. Today, because there are so many census records available to you, I'm going to be limiting the census records I will be talking about to 6 years of census. That is 1940, 1930, 1920, 10, 1900, and then 1890. Our next episode will start with 1880 and work our way back to 1790. One thing that you have to remember is a law that was created back in 1978. That law directly affects census records available to you, and that is the 72-year rule. And a law was passed back then, and it says the United States government will not release personally identifiable information about an individual to any other individual or agency until 72 years after it was collected for the decennial census. Now, what does that mean? The census we just took in 2020, those records will not be available for you to research until 2092. I'm not going to be around then to research those records. The 1950 census will be made available to the public to research in April of 2022. That is the most recent census record that is going to be released, upcoming. But we do have census records that we can access now. And the most recent we have is that of 1940. Let's try to think of what's going on in the world. 1940, the big thing happening, World War II. World War II began the year before. So we can assume, or we can understand why the number of immigrants coming into the United States is dwindling. The 1940 Federal Census is currently the most recent census available to researchers. I was born in the 50s. I'm not even going to be on the 1950 census. So my first record will be in 1960. The 1940 census, this is the first census since 1900 that does not inquire about immigration to the United States. Each and every census, though similar, will have a variety of different questions. So when you look to research your ancestor and when they came over to the United States, the 1940 census isn't going to provide you that date of immigration. However, 30, 20, 10, 1900 will do that. Here are just some of the questions that we're going to be asked on the 1940 census. Street address, house data, name of each person and their relation to the head of household. Sex, race, age, marital status, attended school, highest grade completed. That's sometimes interesting. Place of birth, citizenship. This is a good one. Residence on April 1st, 1935. Here's a chance for you to look into the record. Is that location the same as the 1940 census, where they are being enumerated? If not, that gives you a clue that they moved sometimes prior to 1940 from the 1935 location to the 1940 location. And there were questions for those individuals 14 years or over to answer, and that dealt with employment status, occupation, industry, and income. The 1940 census was released to the public in April of 2012. It's available to you now. And here is just an image of the 1940 Federal Census. They're basically all the same with the information contained therein. The handwriting that you see here, that is actually pretty darn legible. And if I was given that particular census record to look at and to study, I would be very thankful for that handwriting. But what I'd like to do is point something out within the record. And I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see that at home, but I would like you to take close attention to this particular spot right here where the red dot is. And this is regarding place of birth. Elizabeth O'Brien here, who is 65 years old, her place of birth is spelled E-I-R-E. Now, if someone would take a very quick look at that, two things could pop in their mind. Could the census taker have misspelled Erie? E-R-I-E? Maybe Erie, Pennsylvania? Because right now, I'm not sure what that E-I-R-E is referring to. Well, that is a country. And Elizabeth, 65 years old, was born in Era. Era is another name for Ireland. So she was born in Ireland 65 years ago. But her background and her upbringing, when the census taker asked for the information, she provided them with the name of the country she was most used to, Era, Ireland. Again, look inside the record. 1940. We go backwards when we do our research. As we mentioned in episode 1, we take the information we have and work our way back. And so too with the census. The government reached out to the people announcing the upcoming census, just like they did with the 2020. We saw the newspaper articles, we saw the advertisements on TV. The federal government did the same thing, but they put it out in newspapers because that was the media. That was the common media back then. The census of the 1930s, as any other census, reflects the life of what's going on in America at that particular time. So when we take a look at the questions that were asked, there should be some things that pop out to you. So the questions asked. Of course, street address, house data, name of person, relationship to head of family, whether the home is owned or rented. That's pretty interesting. The value of the home or the amount of rent paid. This would be something to take into consideration of seeing how much they were paying for rent. With that information, and then when you combine the occupation, you can sort of guess, wow, this is how much they were making at that particular time. Here's a good one. Possesses a radio set. A radio? A radio set? But this ownership of a radio actually was very important because it showed, wow, they had a way to obtain entertainment, a way to obtain news. The radio set back then was basically their channel to get information, just like we use the TV and the computers today. The radio was the most important thing. Sex, race, age, marital condition, age at first marriage. This should be a clue. This should be one of those things you take a look at. Is the first marriage the same as the marriage cited? If it's not, you've got research to do. Attended school, ability to read and write, birthplace, birthplace of parents, the language spoken in the home before coming to the United States, year of immigration. Is the person naturalized? You may run across little citations. You might see an N for naturalized, AL, which means alien. Sometimes there'll be a letter P. That means pending, that they have started the process but have yet to receive their certificate of naturalization. Can they speak English, their profession, veteran status, and the specific war they fought in? 1930. What wars could they have fought in? World War I, Spanish-American, Civil War. When you are given those clues, that gives you the ability to now search for records in those particular wars. So this is giving you a stepping stone to a whole new set of records. And this is just something taken from the 1929 edition of the Sunday Star. At this time in the United States, one birth was occurring in every 12 seconds. One death every 24 seconds. One immigrant every minute, maybe minute and 3/4. One emigrant every 5 3/4 minutes. So the net gain of people coming in is one person coming into the United States every 20 seconds. And I just thought that was something pretty cool that Flora Orr made in her article. Here we have the 1930 census. And you can see the various things asked of the people in the 1930 census. We read into the census record. And here, for the Dufault family, we can see a lot of them have emigrated from French Canada. What were they speaking in their house? Well, of course it's French. Okay. Again, wonderful looking record. We can come here and see their occupation. Shoemaker, repair shop, a lot of information, a lot of decent things that you can actually see the encapsulation of these particular families. And just to point out here, even though I'm looking at Roger and they don't have a surname listed because that would have been continued on the previous page, if we take a look at his date of, or how old he is, many of the census takers, if they are under 1 year of age, will basically provide you with 2 months out of 12. So that gives you an opportunity to see if the census was taken in April of 1930, Roger then was born probably in February. And that can give you a clue to search for the birth record. You can narrow it down. You don't have to search an entire year. Now you are searching a few months. We jump back again to now we're into 1920. And again, the federal government wants to make people aware of what's coming in the federal census, to prepare for the census taker, to welcome them, to be enumerated. So we'll take a look at the questions of the 1920s. Again, name of street and address, each person residing and their relationship to the head of the family, rented or owned, age on the last birthday, marital status, year of immigration, naturalization, attend school, read and write, parents' place of birth, and language. Are they able to speak English? And then profession and employment. The date of enumeration, the date when the census taker walked through the neighborhood, walked through the town, walked down the farm roads, all of those dates are enumerated at the top of the page. That date becomes your focus if you run into information containing ages. That date, not just generally not the years, 1940, 30, but the actual, just as we did this the last time, April of 1930, we were able to go back and sort of narrow down when Roger was born. So that's something to keep in mind. Children born between January 1st and the day of enumeration were not to be listed, while people alive on January 1st but died prior to the enumeration were to be counted. This poses a bit of a challenge to you. If a child happened to be born in February of 1920, technically, the census taker was not to record them among the family. That poses a challenge because we now have this infant who is technically part of the family and whose first census recording will be now 10 years down the road. What if the child passes away before the next census recording? That is a very difficult challenge for you currently at this time, because really there's no record citing that particular infant. And it may very well be that you'll have to get the church records and things like this and go through each and every page. So if there is a child that happens to just pop up the following census from the 1920 to the 1930, and now we find them on the 1930 census, be aware of this little road bump in the road. we also have to remember that people coming over from the old country into the United States, let's recall what they were experiencing back there in Europe. Maybe people didn't trust government officials for some reason. Some people were very unsure about how to identify themselves on the census as far as where they were from. And we'll explain this a little bit more as we go back into the 1910-1900 census. The Treaty of Versailles, we all know, ended World War I. But what we may not know is that countries were created out of this treaty, those being Czechoslovakia, Finland, Poland, Austria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Yugoslavia, and Hungary. Prior to that time, the countries didn't exist. (1920) census. I thought this was pretty interesting. 87,000 census takers throughout the United States. Unlike the 1910 census, the 1920 did not have questions regarding unemployment, Union or Confederate military service, number of children, or duration of marriage. The census record, here we mention when they came, immigrated to the United States. Here we can see AL, alien. This could either be that the citizenship is pending. It might be an N, a sloppy N at that. We take a look at the date of enumeration. This one happened to be done in January. The previous one of 1930 was in April. Always take a look at that date of enumeration and go from there. 1920. We go back to 1910. The 1910 census. I would like to draw your attention to the map. And just a few moments ago, I mentioned to you the nations created by the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. Here is a map of Europe, 1910, and you will notice that nations that we mentioned before are not on the map. In your research, you may discover, or you may have thought, for example, that your ancestors came from Poland. And you'll get to the 1910 census, and you'll see Russia, or Austria, or Prussia, or Germany. And you might question that. Well, Busha and Jaja always said we were Polish. I don't understand this. What's going on here? Why are they telling the census taker that now we're Russian or Austrian or Prussian or something like that? For the Poles, Poland was partitioned 3 times in its history: 1772, 1793, 1795. It was at 1795 that Poland technically ceased to exist. From 1795 through the Treaty of Versailles, there was no Poland. Poland existed here in the hearts of the people. Officially, there was no nation. So when our ancestors said Poland, they were speaking from here. Others would when they said Russia, Austria, Prussia, they were giving the official title of the country. So you're probably Polish. Don't let the nations dissuade you. If you see those particular nations on the census record, it gives you some idea of where they came from on this geographical map, which will help you in the future. Oops, I'm sorry. The 1910 census. It was microfilmed in the 1940s. Some of the images that you run across, whether it be on Ancestry, FamilySearch.org, MyHeritage, some of the images may be a little unclear, they might be illegible. Check each and every database that I just named. It could very well be that another legible record may exist on one of those. Similar to other years, once the census is microfilmed, the originals are destroyed. There's no going back and refilming census records. This is what we have. We'll take a look at questions asked. Address, name, relationship. Good question coming up that you should always pay attention to. Number of years in present marriage. For women, number of children born and number of children living. That is so vital for your research. So if I can draw your attention to this particular listing, the Penn family, John and Liddy, and if we happen to go across to that information, it says 7 children were born, 4 living. That gives you the clue that you need to search for 3 children that died prior to this census. Please look into the record. Look into the record and see what the record is telling you. It's so important to do that. Ten years back, 1900. Europe hasn't changed. The war has yet to start. We have the German Empire, we have the Russian Empire, we have Austria-Hungary. Again, World War isn't going to start for a few years. And when we take a look at the lifestyle going on at that particular time, let's pay close attention to the way city life was occurring back then. We have just this amount of people coming in to our major cities, and setting up residence there, hopefully finding a job, and then maybe once they obtain a little bit of money and then can move out of the city to another location. We also have going on at the time and this was occurring both in the 1920s, child labor. Children were at times really required to help sustain the family. And it was basically just a given occurrence that teenagers and even kids maybe 12, 11, 10 went out and found jobs. And sometimes not the safest. And child labor, well, that was really one of the bad things going on at the time, but families needed to get by. We had the one-room schoolhouses prevalent throughout the United States. Horse and buggy was the major mode of transportation, and some cities were now having the trolley cars come in as well. 1900. In 1900, this particular census was the first to be what's called soundexed. And soundexed was a indexing project created under Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Works Progress Administration during the Depression. When I first started in genealogy and I was trying to help researchers, I recall somebody coming in to the library, and this is before computers, this is going through microfilm. And I remember a researcher coming in, and we loaded a reel of microfilm from the city of Detroit, and she turned to me and said, "Well, these aren't in alphabetical order." No, they're not. Census records are not in alphabetical order. Census records are merely the records of this census taker going from house to house to house to house. They did not alphabetize the records when they got home. Ain't gonna happen. The Soundex was actually the first index researchers were able to utilize that helped them find people on the census. This system still exists today, but most of the time people are just going to tap in their surnames on the computer and find information that way. Down the road, one of the episodes, I'll be touching base on the Soundex system, just so that you have it if you need it. This was meant to assist the Census Department, and in no way did Franklin Delano Roosevelt or the WPA think about genealogists. They didn't think of us needing to utilize this, but we did. Again, census takers wrote down what our ancestors told them. Was it always the truth? That's something that you have to decide. Here's something to remember about the 1900 census. It is the only census that recorded both the month and year of birth of every person listed. So as you scroll through the census, in these two columns, you will notice the month and the year of birth. It is a phenomenal find and something that we immediately go to as researchers. The 1900 census was also the first to indicate the date of immigration to the United States, the years in the United States, and the status of their naturalization. Okay. So here we have them coming into the United States. So Barbara, somebody, because the husband was probably listed on the previous page, came over in 1872. We now have that year to begin researching Barbara. I'm going to do a little quick timeout, and that deals with immigration. When you look at immigration, quite a few people, I'm not going to say everybody, a lot of people believe New York. Everybody's coming to Ellis Island. Not the truth. There were ports just as important as New York that our ancestors could have arrived at. It could be Baltimore. It could be Philadelphia. It could be Boston. It could be Galveston. It could be New Orleans. Our ancestors could have landed at Halifax, Nova Scotia. They could have landed at Quebec, the city of Quebec, and simply crossed the river, and you're in the North Atlantic states. If you can't find your ancestors coming into New York, expand your horizon. Well, it could very well be, did somebody misspell your ancestor's name in New York? Yeah, that's a chance. But if you're banging your head on New York, New York, New York, think the other ports. It might be worth your while. (1890). In the Federal Census of 1890, the population of the United States in that year alone was nearly 63 million people. The population has increased over 25% in 10 years. These census takers got a lot of walking to do and a lot of riding, so there might be some blisters on the old saddle sore. Okay? There were only 42 states in the United States at the time. The territories you can see right here: Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arizona, Alaska, Hawaii. The 1890 census has a really different look. And I hope you pay attention to this form. It should remind you of something. From episode 1, take a good hard look. Does it look familiar? Do you recall in our first session, I introduced 2 forms to you. One was the generational pedigree chart, and the other form was a family group sheet. This census record really is a neat record because it encapsulates a family per one sheet. Questions asked. We have the address, the number of families in the house, so we have 3 actual families living under this particular address, the number of persons in the house, whether individuals are listed by name, whether they were a soldier during the Civil War, Union and Confederate, widow or veteran, relationship to head of family, race, sex, age, marital status, if a mother, number of children, and the number living. So once again, 13 children were born, 10 living. Major clue, you have 3 kids to look for. We have the place of birth of the father, place of birth of the mother. when you take a look at places of birth, what do our ancestors tell them? Here, you see, Washington, Washington, Washington. Place of birth of father, okay, England. And then it comes to Rosetta here, was actually born in Dublin, Ireland. It's giving you the city of their place of birth. Catherine, also born in Dublin. And then we have Helen, born in Washington. Those are clues. Those are clues that you are able to utilize to determine when they made it to the United States. Occupation, months, employed, unemployed, ability to read and write. I bet you can't wait to get into this 1890 census. Unfortunately, on January 10th, 1921, this is probably one of the darkest days in genealogical research history, because it was on this day that a fire occurred at the Department of Commerce in Washington, D.C., and basically destroyed the 1890 census. The records are gone. As you can see from these particular headlines, priceless census records wiped out. Fire destroys census records, government. 1790 through 1920, census records burned. Census data of 120 years ruined by fire and water. And just take a look at these images taken of the Commerce Department. This is and was devastating. And it still is for us as researchers. Instead of enumerations of some 63 million people, which we mentioned prior on another slide, only 6,160 survived the fire. That's less than 1%. Everything else was gone, is gone, and you have no way to recover it. There are very limited, fragmented survivors of this devastating fire. From Alabama, the District of Columbia, Georgia, Illinois, Minnesota, New Jersey, New York, North Carolina, Ohio, South Dakota, and Texas. But they are not entire states. They are mere counties. And they are not entire counties. They are townships, partials of towns. This particular fire now forces researchers, forces you to find your ancestor in 1880 and jump to 1900. So instead of a 10-year gap, now we are dealing with a 20-year gap. What could possibly happen to your family in 20 years? Probably a lot. That someone could actually be born into the family, possibly die. Someone could be born into the family and marry and move on. The things that could happen to families at this time period, in those 20 years, is astronomical. And that's going to pose a challenge to your research. We're going to bring our episode to a conclusion. In this episode, I talked about the census records available to you from 1940 back to 1890. What I would like you to do during this time frame until we return with episode 4, I would like you to investigate a variety of your ancestors in the 5 surviving censuses that I talked about today. And those being 1900, 1910, 1920, 1930, 1940. Remember to utilize Ancestry Library Edition, which you have access to until the end of December by going through the library's website and entering your library card and PIN number. My Heritage Library, which you can access off the library's website, or signing up for your own account at FamilySearch.org. I emphasize to you, and I can't do it strongly enough, start with 1940 and work your way backwards. As in all genealogical research, one of the things I'd like to get across is we always start with the most recent and work our way backwards. We're going to do the same thing here. In closing, please pay close attention to census information that involves how many children were born and how many survived. Is the number the same? Is the number different? When did your ancestors immigrate to the United States? Are the years cited in the census records the same? If not, another research challenge. When did they come to the United States? Is your ancestors' birth month and year correct on the 1900 census? Maybe that was something you never even had. The 1900 census will provide you that first clue to start the ball rolling. Did your ancestor remain in a particular town, city, state, or did they move? If so, is there a way to determine the cause of the move through your family? Why did they settle in Sandusky, Ohio, and then they moved to Detroit? Why did they settle in Detroit? And now I've got them in Dubuque, Iowa. Was it the economy? Why did they go that way? Was there a brother and sister there that drew them and invited them out there? That's what genealogy research is all about, is going out there and exploring the unexpected and trying to find out that information. You know, I can't wait. I would love to see people reply to me and tell me the information that they found in their genealogies watching these particular episodes. The episodes will continue. Episode 4 will be dealing with the census records again, but this time we're going back from 1880 all the way to 1790. Maybe you're lucky enough that one of your ancestors participated in the American Revolution or happened to be one of the founding families that settled in the early colonies. Phenomenal. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Here's my email address right there. ccatafias@livoniapubliclibrary.org. Thanks for watching. Stay safe. Stay healthy. Good luck on your research. And we'll see you next episode. See you soon. Bye-bye.